I've seen many best country videos on YouTube. You click on them, then you look at the timestamps. Oh, it's this country, that country. Maybe you do a little bit of Googling on each country, and that's it. You've extracted everything you need from the video. The video was like 15 minutes, you watched 2 minutes of it. And that's because the value in those videos is the fact that they're giving you the countries. But that's a short-term way of thinking of it. Countries change, things change. Costa Rica might be a good place now, but it might not be a good place in 3 years. How are you gonna know if Costa Rica is a good place to go to in 3 years, or in 5 years, or in 10 years? At that point, you're reliant on me to tell you whether I recommend Costa Rica or not. No, you have to learn how to evaluate Costa Rica by yourself. You have to understand the factors that build into health, so that you can look at the country, you can look at some statistics, and you know, okay, this is a place I need to go to, or this is a place I need to avoid. There are country recommendations at the end, but those don't make sense and won't be valuable if you don't know why I am recommending those countries. But wait, can't you just be healthy in any country? Why should you even care? Don't you get sunlight in every country, which is enough to get enough vitamin D? You know, if you only go for 3 months every year and you get a little bit of sun on your hands and your face, isn't that enough to get enough vitamin D? From a hydration perspective, you just need clean water, and you can, filter your water, and that's all you need to do. You see, this is if you follow conventional health advice. And if you're new here, conventional health advice is not the best health advice, and you'll need to watch my other videos to understand what I'm talking about here. But long story short, we need far more sunlight, we need far more mineral-rich food that comes from mineral-rich soils. We need things that are illegal in many cases in many countries that are hard to access. The Scandinavian countries are very depressed in general. They have very high rates of mental illness. Now, what do they really like doing? I live in Sweden, and I know many people who are Swedish, and what they love the most is going to Spain, southern Spain, okay? They love going to southern Spain. Why is that? Because they need more sunlight. They intuitively know that they need more sunlight, and they return with a tan and they feel great. Their vitamin D levels just shot up, and they got a bunch of red light therapy. In Sweden, and in Denmark, and in Norway, and in Finland, and even in Iceland, you don't get sunlight for most of the year. So what do you think happens to people? They get pretty depressed. I've seen accounts of people here on YouTube talking about them going to tanning beds during the winter and just having their mood be much better from the UV exposure. You see? So, no, it is not enough to expose your face and your hands for 5 minutes in the sun every day to get enough vitamin D. No, the RDA for vitamin D is far higher. It's at approximately 9,000 IUs. Now, those are the Scandinavian people. Now imagine the people who are from the Middle East and from Africa who live in the northern latitudes, who live in Sweden and Finland and Norway and Canada. What's happening to those people? They're absorbing less sunlight because their skin protects them from excess UV light, but there's no UV light up there in the first place. So what happens is they're far more prone to vitamin D levels. While if you look at the Ethiopians who are living in Ethiopia, or the Nigerians who are living in Nigeria, or the people in Congo who are living in Congo, not in Canada, they don't have problems with vitamin D, and in general their mood is great. Now this requires another video, but if you think the sun causes skin cancer, melanoma is mostly found in places on the body that haven't been exposed to the sun. Think about that. Oh, and in this study they found that the more sun you're exposed to, the longer you live. Food access is also a very big problem in many of these countries. Like I live in Sweden, you might imagine that it might be easy to access raw milk and raw dairy and good meat in this country. And yes, for meat, sure, you can access good meat, but it's expensive because this is a northern European country with a fairly strong economy, so you're going to pay a lot for it. With raw dairy, you might think that it's easy to access raw dairy, but no, it's not. It's very hard. Around me, there aren't many farmers, but if you go to Costa Rica, it's very easy to get raw dairy, it's very easy to get high quality meat, high quality seafood, and the soils over there are far less depleted. So the cow that's eating the grass, that grass is coming from very nutrient-rich, mineral-rich soils, and so that gets into the cow, and then when I eat the cow, that gets into me, and that gets into you. While if you live in a place like the US or in Northern Europe, where maybe the soils are a bit more abused, and the cow eats the grass, well, you're not going to get as many minerals. You can live in Switzerland and you'll have access to very high quality food, you'll have good air quality, everything will probably be great, but can you afford it? It's very expensive, so you also have to think about, okay, if I'm going to this country and I want these things, can I afford them? Now that you understand some of the reasons why you'd want to leave the country that you're in, again, you might be in a perfect country, but for most people I talk to, that's not the case, including in my country as well. We're going to begin by talking about indirect factors. There are indirect factors and direct factors, because remember, we're looking at these countries from the lens of health, not the lens of saving as much money as possible because you're a businessman. No, we're viewing these countries from a health lens. When I talk about direct factors, I'm talking about things that directly influence your health. So air quality, food access, the weather, how much sunlight you're getting, consistency when it comes to the length of the day, because again, if the day varies a lot during the year, then your sleep schedule will be messed up. While if you live in El Salvador, for example, you'll wake up and you'll go to sleep almost at the same time all year. When we talk about indirect factors, we're talking about tsunamis, earthquakes, safety, population density, the location of the country, is it placed between the US and Russia? Things like that. The passport, citizenship, taxes, the economy, the government. The first indirect factor is exposure risk, or you can translate that to geographical risk so that you understand what I'm talking about. But it's called exposure risk. And here's a map of exposure risk all across the world. What am I talking about? I'm talking about natural disasters. You see, if you live in Europe or you live in Africa, you're not living somewhere where there are two tectonic plates that are pushing against each other or going away from each other. Which means that you're not going to have earthquakes and tsunamis and this and that. Like in Sweden, the only exposure risk we have is these harsh winters. We don't get any earthquakes or tsunamis, we don't get anything over here. So from that perspective, we're very good. Well, if you go to Southeast Asia, yeah, you might get sun, you might get this, you might get that, but there is an earthquake risk. There are tsunamis because you've got a bunch of tectonic plates intercepting in that area. And that's why Japan has a bunch of earthquakes, Thailand gets tsunamis, Philippines get tsunamis. It's the same with South America. If you look at South America, you see that Paraguay, the landlocked country, has barely any risk for exposure. While if you look at Brazil, they have a risk of flooding. You look at Chile, they have a big risk of earthquakes because the country is right next to two tectonic plates pushing against each other. And that's why they have that big-ass mountain range over there. So yes, if you're considering Florida or Thailand, sure, they've got great weather, but what you're paying is a very high exposure risk, a very high risk of, in Florida you've got hurricanes, and in Thailand you've got tsunamis. So you have to think about these things before deciding on a country. Outside of exposure risk, there's also political risk, or geopolitical risk. If you're in Argentina, you're far away from the US and Russia, so you're not going to get bombed, okay? You're going to be fairly safe down there. While if you're very close or between the US and Russia, you might have problems if war breaks out. If you're near Ukraine, that might be a problem. If you're near Sudan or near Ethiopia and Eritrea, that might be a problem. Or if you're in the Middle East, that's also a problem. Next, you have the government. And there are many things that you can talk about when it comes to the government, but I'm talking about government intrusiveness more specifically. So if you go to Romania and Bulgaria, which are both great options, by the way, I'm not kidding, they've got lower crime rates than many European countries, and great tax policies too. The government isn't that intrusive, so they won't spank you if you do something wrong. In comparison to the US, there's no government surveillance going on over there. There might be, but not as much as the US. With the US, for example, and this is a tax policy. Wherever you go in the world, if you're a US citizen, you have to pay tax to the US. So if you live in Thailand and you're a US citizen, you're paying tax to Thailand and the US. While for most countries, if you don't live in that country, you don't pay tax there. But in general, this ties into the US government surveillance. They are very good at surveilling everyone, and they know exactly what you're doing and if you're paying your taxes or not, even if you're on the other side of the world. Which means that yes, you might be living in a good place in the US and you might be doing stuff that's nice and healthy, but if you care about government surveillance and you care about being free and not being tampered with, the US might not be the best option. You might be thinking, isn't tax something that some rich guy needs to think about? I don't earn that much, I don't need to care about tax. Well, you see, The way you buy food and shelter and things that you need for health is through money. And so if your net income is affected by taxes, well, then taxes indirectly affect your health. When you're picking a country, you should pick a country that doesn't take all your money. The Caribbean islands are very good at not taking your money and not being intrusive. Paraguay is great. Again, Eastern Europe is great. Bulgaria and Romania, they don't take a lot of your money at all. While you might think that these two countries are good, Spain and Portugal, but they actually have fairly high taxes. You can have the perfect country in the world, but if you can't go there or if you can't stay there, then that's a problem. So you need to pick a country where there is a clear path to citizenship. You have to pick a country where it's not that hard to get residency. Mexico, for example, it's very easy. You go there, you show them that you have money, then you can get temporary residency, and then you extend that a few times, and then you get permanent residency, and after that you get your citizenship if you stay there. So that's not a very hard process. There are other countries where if you're rich and you're watching this, you can just pay them and they'll give you a citizenship. It's called citizenship by investment. And then generally you've got the economy. I mean, as I touched upon before, if you live in Switzerland, you have great air quality, you have good access to food. The weather might be a little bit iffy because it's in Central Europe. You have pretty harsh winters, but still, it's all right in many, many aspects. However, can you afford it? Is it too expensive for you? For most people, it is. It's one of the most expensive places in the world. Same thing with Norway. Norway is very expensive. Same thing with many places in the US. They're also very expensive, although those places are usually big cities, which is something that you should probably avoid. While if you look at Central America, you look at South America, you look at Southeast Asia, you see that things are far less expensive over there, which means that if you're able to get your money online or from another source that isn't from that country, because again, cheapness and wages go together, you don't want to drastically lower your wage when you're going somewhere. You want to be getting the same amount of money ideally, or at least something that you can live off of. You can do far more things for your health with that money in those countries as opposed to in Switzerland. The next indirect factor is safety. But when you look at safety, it's very easy to get misled. Because if you look at Mexico, you might see that there are many places with very high homicide rates. Now the thing is, that depends on where in Mexico you are. Are you close to the border between Mexico and the US? Or are you in the Yucatan Peninsula? Because there are places in the Yucatan Peninsula that are safer than almost any city in the US. You see, if you pick the right place in Mexico or in some other country that might be considered dangerous, you might hit the jackpot. For example, I believe Merida, the city in Mexico in the Yucatan Peninsula, is the second safest city in North America. I mean, in general, the Yucatan Peninsula is very, very safe. I mean, it's not just Merida. There are other, small cities over there that you could pick that you could probably hit the jackpot there. Meat of the Matter, for example, a person on YouTube who used to be a vegan, then went on the primal diet and is now looking amazing. He first went to the Philippines, then he didn't like it there, so he went to Oaxaca in Mexico, and he says it's amazing, and the food access is great, and everything is great. So Mexico is definitely an option, but you have to understand how to look at safety. It's not just about the country itself, it's about where in the country you are. Population density matters in this area, so that's why the size of the country is very important, and the place you pick in the country is very important. The big cities are always going to have higher crime rates, they're going to have worse air quality, there's going to be more problems in those areas because there are more human beings there. And so there's more demand on certain things, and so the solutions to the problems that are created are going to create problems, especially from a health perspective. Now, this is definitely personal preference, but do you want to have access to the modern world? Do you want to have internet? Do you want to be able to order stuff online, like very valuable books, for example? Do you want to be able to consume new information that might change your life? Those are the things I think about when I think about access to the modern world and the internet in general. Being able to access this amount of valuable information. I mean, what you're doing right now, many people who live on the countryside who are very, very healthy, all the tribes that Weston A. Price looked at, they couldn't do this. And what I'll say here is you need to pick. If you pick access to the modern world, you'll create problems for yourself, but you'll solve a bunch of problems. If you go to the countryside, you'll solve a bunch of problems, but you'll also create other problems. You can live off the land without any technology, That will be a great thing, but it will come with its set of problems. The last thing, which I barely hear anyone mention, is popularity. So Costa Rica, great place, good soils, good food access, great weather, very good nature. But me and you know about it. And so other people know about it. So in 10 years, how many people are going to move there? I don't know. But many people are going to move there. Well, if you compare that to some place like Paraguay, which no one really considers, most people don't even know that that country exists. How many people are going to move there? Yes, it's starting to become popular, but it's not nearly as popular as Costa Rica. Two very popular places to go to retire, to move to, are Portugal and Spain. So what we're seeing with Portugal, for example, is the prices rising, housing becoming more difficult, and many Portuguese people are complaining about the fact that the government cares more about the wealthy people who are moving there in comparison to how much they care about the rest of the population. So something you have to consider is how many people are going to move here, what is the government going to do about this, and how is the tourism in general? Will I be left alone, or will this place be transformed into some tourist utopia which will make it unlivable for me? I want you to do something as we speak. Go into a website called iqair.com. This is a fantastic website. It shows you the air quality all across the world. Look up your place, then look up the places that you're interested in. For example, I was very interested in Thailand and the Philippines because many people go there. It's warm. It's a bit freer from what I've heard. It's not the same as the West. The culture is more open. The people are very social and friendly over there. But I went into IQ Air and started looking at certain places. And what I found was that most cities in Asia, or Asia in general, has very bad air quality, which means that I could never, ever live there. That's why I don't recommend living there. Air quality should be the top priority when it comes to pollution, because everything starts with the air. Whatever is pumped out into the air will go into the water, it will go into the soil, it will go into your food. And if we look at what you do on a day-to-day basis, what do you do most? Do you breathe, drink water, or eat the most? You breathe the most, which means that the most important thing that needs to be clean is the air. However, air quality works the same as with safety. If we look at Merida in Mexico, you'll see that the air quality over there is far better than most Mexican cities, and the safety is also better. So if we look at Mexico and we see that many of the cities have bad air quality, well, there are also places with good air quality, which means that if we are willing to sacrifice some things, you can go to smaller cities with good air quality. It's the same with Thailand and Asia in general, Indonesia and the Philippines. You can still go there, but you'll have to go to smaller cities, less known places. And if you decide to live there, what you'll have to sacrifice probably is access to certain things. It will be harder to deliver things over there. You won't be able to order things from Amazon as easily, and your internet connection will probably be much slower. Air quality is just one part of the equation. You've also got water quality. So if you go to Iceland, Iceland has the best water quality in the world. You can easily shower and even drink the tap water. That's not a problem there. If you compare Iceland to the US puts fluoride and I believe they also put chlorine in the water, which means that you shouldn't drink the tap water. You shouldn't shower in it either. You need to have a fairly good high quality shower filter to shower safely over there, and even then there might be problems depending on where you live. Los Angeles seems to be far worse than some other places. In Sweden, I've checked the reports on the tap water and I don't really see anything bad in it, so you can drink the tap water if you're in Sweden. However, I do not do it because they do put a little bit of chlorine in the water, but it's a very, very small amount, and if you're showering it's not really going to be a problem. So if you prioritize water and that's the number one thing for you, of course, go to Iceland or any Nordic country or many European countries in general. But if you care about the weather, then you should go to some other place, because if you go to Iceland, you're going to become vitamin D deficient. It's not a really good place to live unless you really like the cold. If you feel like you'd rather be vitamin D deficient but live in a place where there is this cold environment because for some reason you really like this cold environment, sure, shave off 10 years of your life, but live the years that you do live in a very good manner. You also have to consider farming practices. So some countries are more organic than others. If you look at Netherlands uses a lot of pesticides. Brazil uses a lot of pesticides. Japan uses a lot of pesticides. So certain countries are going to use more agrochemicals. And the problem with agrochemicals is it doesn't just affect your food. You can't just buy organic and avoid them. These things get out into the environment. They get into the water. They get into the soil, of course. They get into the air. If the country uses a lot of agrochemicals, you're going to get more agrochemicals into you. So this is a map where they show the countries that use the most agrochemicals. And ideally, you should pick a country that doesn't have a lot of agrochemical usage, especially in relation to its size. So the Netherlands is a very small country, but they use a lot of pesticides. So that will be a very bad country to live in, because ideally you want to have local food. You don't want to eat imported food. So if you live in the Netherlands and they're using that many agrochemicals, then obviously whatever you eat that's local is going to have pesticides on it. And even if you buy organic, that's still going to have pesticides, but not as much. And lastly, when it comes to pollution, you also have the problem of urbanization. So if we look at the country of Sweden, which I reside in, 2/3 of the country is just a big fat forest. And the population density is very, very low. We've got 10 million people and one of the biggest countries in Europe. I didn't know that, but again, it's one of the biggest countries in Europe, apparently. There's no need to destroy nature to make sure that people can live in certain places. The less people you have, the less demand you have for certain things, which means that we've preserved nature really well. We also have laws that preserve nature over here, which means that when I look over there outside the window, I see a bunch of trees. If I look to the left, I see a bunch of trees. If I look to the right, I see a bunch of trees. Well, if I go to the Middle East, even in the good countries like Saudi Arabia, or if I go to the UAE, I see no trees. And I hate that. I hate living in those environments because there's no nature. They've urbanized everything. It's just tall buildings. It's just build, destroy nature. I don't like that. And if you don't like that, if you like nature, then you need to go to a place that respects nature, something that affects your vitamin D status, your health overall, the amount of red light you get, your circadian rhythm, your overall mood, your dopamine levels, your sleep schedule, whether you're depressed or not, is the weather and how much sun you're getting. So whenever I talk to anyone who is up here in the north, or in Central or Northern Europe in general, we always complain about not getting enough sunlight and not getting enough vitamin D. And you might think, oh, why don't you just supplement with vitamin D? That comes with its own set of problems. You'll lose the ability to create vitamin D, and this is something I learned from Dr. Jack Kruse. That's just one of the reasons why I don't recommend vitamin D supplementation. There are other reasons. If you want me to make a video about that, like the video and tell me in the comments, and I'll make it for you. There's a website called weatherspark.com, and this website is on par with IQ Air in how amazing it is. You can look up any city on this website, and it will tell you detailed information about the climate. So the weather year-round. Put in Stockholm, that's where I'm at right now. Put in Stockholm into that website. I want you to do this as I'm speaking. Look at how disgusting the weather is over here. You've got 3 months of the weather being comfortable. Then for the rest of the year, you've got cool, cold, and very cold. I mean, the entire thing is just green. I don't want to be unkind to Sweden. Sweden is in many aspects a fantastic place to live. However, when it comes to the most important things in relation to health, I'd say that Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Mexico, and these warmer tropical countries beat it by a mile because of their food access and because of their climate. But it's not enough to just know the temperature. What you need is to understand Earth's climatic zones. So, from a health perspective, from what I'm seeing, you want to be in a subtropical region, a tropical region, or a temperate region. And the temperate regions really vary. I think they're the most broad ones. The places you absolutely need to avoid are the boreal climates. You need to avoid the ice cap climates and the tundra climates. Why? Because there's no life there. No life there. No UV, no nothing. It's just cold and miserable. Okay? And if you live in a warm country and you're watching this and you're saying, oh, I'd love to be in Sweden, anything but the heat. No, okay? You would rather have that heat than have the opposite, which is extreme cold, okay? Heat is always better. Why? Because at least you're getting sunlight. The heat is coming from the sunlight, okay? And around you there is life. When it's cold, no one goes outside. There's depression, okay? If you're in a hot country and you're thinking about going somewhere colder, don't go to a place that's too cold, okay? Get Northern Europe out of your head. Don't go here. Visit, but don't live here, because you're not going to get sunlight. However, these climatic zones are not nearly enough to make a decision. You have to understand that the most important thing, especially when it comes to food, is how much life do you find in a certain area. So if you go to Costa Rica, the nature is amazing. You see all of this green, beautiful nature, these nice beaches. That means that there's a lot of life going on there. While if you go to the horse latitudes, which, if I'm not mistaken, the Middle East is placed in the horse latitude region of the world, you see no life. It's just a big fat desert. And that means there's no life there. That means food access is going to be limited there. So you want to go to a place that's going to have a lot of life, and those places are generally going to be more wet, because without water, nothing grows. And that's the problem you have in the Middle East and the desert regions of the world. You don't have a lot of life there. Another thing you need to consider is your genes. If you're an equatorial African and you're living in Sweden, you're going to suffer a lot. You're going to have severe problems, because a Swedish person is designed to maximize their vitamin D production during the summer because their skin is light. It takes in a lot of UV. You have dark skin. It won't take in a lot of UV. So you'll get far less vitamin D from Swedish summer than a Swedish person will, because the Swedish person has very light skin. And if you think for some reason that I'm being a bit racist, absolutely not. This has to do with biology. A Swedish person should absolutely not live near the equator unless they really know what they're doing. And they're monitoring their UV exposure very carefully, and they're protecting themselves from the sun in a very good manner. While an equatorial African, they'll be able to live there far more successfully than the Swedish person. Because of the problems with vitamin D supplementation, what you have to do is you either have to go on a vacation to get the vitamin D and then return, so it's a business trip, but it's a health trip, so the business is your health, or you move to another country. And I'd say that the biggest reason why people move to another country is not necessarily because of vitamin D, but because of the weather. It's not just about vitamin D. Vitamin D, you get that from UV radiation, and UV radiation does far more than just give you vitamin D. I've seen accounts of people who, instead of moving to another country, they go to tanning beds and they mainly get UVA. So you get vitamin D from UVB, they're getting UVA. And they say that their winter depression goes away when they go to the tanning bed. So imagine what UV light is doing. There's this guy called Jack Cruz, a doctor called Jack Cruz. One of his patients became an accidental patient, so to speak. This guy was really depressed and he wanted to end it. And he said, I need help. He told Jack Cruz, I need help. So Jack Cruz told him, come to El Salvador. And this guy had severe gut-brain axis issues. So he had digestive issues and brain issues. And those two systems go hand in hand. So one increases the problems in the other, so to speak. Jack Cruz told him to sunbathe. He told him to get a deep tan. And he did. And in 2 months, his depression went away and he had no gut issues. But this poses a very important question. If your people are Irish, and they're made for Ireland, their genes are very suited for Ireland, shouldn't you stay in Ireland for optimal health? If you're Italian, shouldn't you stay in Italy? If you're Greek, shouldn't you stay in Greece? If you're Middle Eastern, shouldn't you be somewhere in the Middle East, which would be the healthiest for you because your people have lived there for thousands of years? That's where your genes come from. Shouldn't you return to the place where your genes are from? It's really about the best place to go. If you're from the Middle East and you're in Europe, you shouldn't go back to the Middle East just because you're supposed to be in a desert environment that's at a certain latitude. We've lived there, but we've had to adapt, creating things that aren't really a part of the environment to shield ourselves from the environment. There are better places. There are places where you would get the same amount of sunlight if you're Middle Eastern, but higher up, so Greece or Italy, that's sufficient if you're Middle Eastern, but Northern Europe isn't. You see, even though you're from Northern Europe, you don't need to get that little sunlight. More sunlight will be better. What I'm really trying to say here is that if you go to Mexico and you don't get any sunlight, you don't sunbathe, you aren't out in the sun, you're going to have health problems. It doesn't matter that you're in Mexico because you're not being exposed to the sun. So the country itself doesn't matter, it's the factors that matter. As long as you have enough sunlight for most of the year and you're being exposed to it, you're not going to have any problems. The specific country in relation to your genes doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the UV. That's it. And the UV can be monitored by how much sunlight you're being exposed to, and that's something you control anywhere you go, except if you're resourceless in the middle of the desert. The next direct factor, and one of the most important ones, is food access. I've talked to many people. One of these people is a guy from Singapore, a young man from Singapore who was dealing with histamine issues and leaky gut and whatnot. I usually work with what someone has in their environment, what they have in the grocery stores, what they have access to. If you say that you don't have access to raw milk or some type of meat, but you have access to this and that, I try to make a plan out of those things. In terms of your nutrition, of course, there are other things to consider as well. This man had access to nothing. I'm talking nothing. He had access to meat, beef, but he had to order it, and it was very, very expensive. Singapore is a place, and many of the big cities in Asia are places where you can't access anything. Well, if you go to California and you go to many places in the US, the food access there is pretty good. The next very helpful website is called getrawmilk.com, and the reason I'm mentioning it is not so that you can go and get raw milk anywhere in the world. It's not because of that. It just tells you that there's a farm there. And what do I mean by that? Why is that important? Well, because if you want high quality food, organic food, from people who actually care about what they're producing and not just a factory farm or some big corporation who's growing a bunch of crops in the monocrop manner from deficient soils. If you want high quality food, you either farm and you do it yourself, you grow it yourself, you take care of animals yourself, and you check for everything so that you get the thing, the desired product that you want, that you know is going to be the most healthy for you. Or you buy it from a farm. And most people aren't going to become farmers. Most people are going to buy stuff from grocery stores that sell things that come from good farms or directly from farms. So, wherever you go in the world, you want to have access to food. And so you need to have relationships with farmers. And the bigger your network is, the more foolproof it is. So if you get everything from one farm and this farm has problems, then you're not going to get that food. So you need to have a network of farms all around you, wherever you are in the world. So with this website, you can roughly speaking know that there are farms in the area. And why is this important? Why is this not about raw milk? Because this is a farm. If they give you raw milk, they also have animals. If they have animals, they have meat. They probably have chickens, and you can get eggs from that. They might have honey. They might be growing plants. You see, you can get a complete, healthy, organic, pollution-free, high-quality diet just from one farm, if you're lucky. But getrawmilk.com isn't perfect, because if you go to Argentina on the getrawmilk.com map, you'll see no dairy farms. But Argentina has more cows than people, so of course they have lots of raw milk. And from the Argentinians who I've talked to, they all seem to have access to raw milk. They don't seem to have any problems on that front. With Argentina, it's a running joke that all they eat over there is steak. It's the same with Brazil. Not that all they eat is steak, but they also produce a lot of cows. Unfortunately, at the expense of the Amazon rainforest. But still, if you go there, you'll undoubtedly find regenerative farms all across Brazil. Which means that you'll have pretty good access to food. They also have a lot of fruit. They're one of the biggest orange producers in the world, and if you like oranges, you can go to Brazil. So Brazil wouldn't be bad. The tropics in general aren't bad because the conditions for having food access are great over there. It's the same for Costa Rica. The reason why Costa Rica is so popular is because you got lots of sunlight, you've got beaches, you know, you've got everything that you'd want on a vacation. You don't have a lot of nightlife, big metropolitan cities, blah blah blah, disgusting modern shit. You have nature, beaches, and pretty good food access, honestly. If you go to the Get Raw Milk map, because there are so many health conscious people who go there, there are people who have put down the farms over there. So there are many farms there that you can get raw milk and high quality meat from. The problem with Costa Rica is if you're rich, it's perfect. But if you're not, the prices over there are going up because of so many Westerners going there. Then you also have to think about laws in relation to how enforcing the government is. So in Sweden, we have a pretty enforcing government, and we have very strict nature preserving laws, which means that if you go on a hiking trip and you want to snare a rabbit, or a camping trip and you want to snare a rabbit, or you want to kill a deer with some kind of trap and you want to eat it over there with your friends, you can't do that. That's illegal. You'll end up in prison if you do that, because you can't kill animals in the wild unless you have a hunting license and it's the correct season and it's the correct animal and it's this and it's the correct area and that and blah blah blah. So when it comes to those laws, it's not as nice. With raw milk is illegal to sell unless it's from a farm and it's directly to the consumer, and it's to a private consumer, it's not to a company. But even then, over here there aren't many farms, dairy farms in general. While if you go to the US, it seems as though the hunting laws over there are more relaxed. You can do those things. You can go out into the forest and you can kill a deer and eat it. You're allowed to trap bears and, shoot an arrow through their heart and, respectfully eat every part of the animal, because that's why you killed it, I hope. If you're interested in health, that's why you're going to kill a bear, not for any other reason, but to eat it. You've also got the state of California, where raw milk is legal. The food access in general is very great there, but raw milk is legal because of Agenus Wonderplanet. If you want to know more about him, then check out that video. Health-wise, it is really important to eat local food, not just because shipping the food across distances for long periods of time is going to diminish the quality of the food. It's not going to be as fresh. It's also because you want the food that you're eating to have been hit by the same sun that you got hit by. And if you want to know why that is, you have to watch my interview with Jack Cruz, where he explains this perfectly. But you want local food. And so if you go to Costa Rica or Brazil or Argentina, you're going to get local food. Those places are very great when it comes to food access, same with California. But if you go to some island, or you go to a certain city which imports most of its stuff, like Dubai for example, Dubai might be hailed as a great technological prosperous place, but no, they don't have any food there that's produced locally. Nothing, because it's a desert. And hey, if you're going to live in a calm place in the Middle Eastern countryside, which is the same as saying you're going to live in the desert, and the air quality there is great and you've got your livestock, sure, no problem. So before you move somewhere, you have to think, okay, do I have access to the same foods that make me feel good currently? Or am I going to find the foods that I actually want to access when I go there? You might think that you can find something in that country, but then you find out that you can't access it. Like if you're in Sweden and you're reliant on elk meat for some reason. You have access to elk meat because some friend of yours is a hunter. They have a hunting license and they shoot big fat elks and they give you the meat because you're very, very lucky. You're a very, very lucky individual, okay? You have to start thinking about it in another manner. Okay, do I want more sunlight? Yes. Okay, can I eat in a certain way which mimics the elk meat diet that I currently have? Yes, if I eat cows, grass-fed organic cows. Is it the same? No. If you're reliant on fruit in, let's say, Northern Europe that's imported, obviously that's a bad thing. So if you go to Brazil or you go to Mexico or you go to South America in general or the tropics, you're going to have access to local fruit almost all year round depending on the country. So that's a great change for you. Now lastly, you've got EMF, and if you're immediately rolling your eyes, you need to watch this video. This is probably one of the best EMF videos ever done on YouTube because I can't see how a person would watch it without understanding that EMF is clearly a health concern based on the biology, based on the evidence that we have. Anyway, big cities, whether you're in Sweden or you're in Nepal or you're in China or you're in Argentina or you're in the US or Canada or Switzerland or Italy, you're going to have cell towers, you're going to have power lines, you're going to have blue artificial light. But the focus, in my opinion, shouldn't really be EMF. This is really, truly a debate about should you go to the countryside, should you go to a small city, or should you go to a big city? I would always say avoid the big cities. It's always between small cities and the countryside. And it really depends on what it is that you want, what it is that you want to live out, how you want to live. If you want to live a very, very quiet life and you want to be self-sufficient and you have no problems working with animals and being on a farm and this and that, then go to the countryside. If you don't want that and you want to rely on other farms and you want to have access to Wi-Fi and all of that, really, you can do that on the countryside, but still it's easier in the small cities. Go to a small city. The big city is going to give you more of modernity, but the problem is you've got EMF, you've got blue light, you've got more sound, you've got all of these problems, really. And the only way that you could live in a big city without too many problems is if you live on the periphery. If you don't live in the center of the city, you live a few kilometers away, like 20 or 30 kilometers away, because then you have access to the city, but you don't have a cell tower on the top of every single building that you look at, which means that you're going to live in a place that's being absolutely bombarded by radio frequency. Well, if you live somewhere that's on the periphery, you're not going to have as many cell towers, and it will be pretty easy to avoid EMF in general. Now that you know what goes into evaluating a country, we can actually start talking about what countries are good, what countries fit these criteria. The first country that I want to recommend is Paraguay. Paraguay, as opposed to many South American countries, is more right-leaning, not left-leaning. And when I say right, I'm not talking about fascism, I'm not talking about anything that's bad. I'm talking about making sure that the citizens can do what they want with their money and with their life. More toward that. Okay, not too much toward that, because then, you've got anarchy and you've got chaos. The first thing I really like about Paraguay is the fact that not many people know about it. If you go to the average US citizen and you say, in what continent is Paraguay? Or do you know about the country of Paraguay? Either they'll lie or they don't know about it. Most people don't know about Paraguay. It's like St. Kitts and Nevis. Do people know about St. Kitts and Nevis? No. No one knows about St. Kitts and Nevis. Paraguay has very low taxes. Okay, the taxes are low, and it's also a territorial tax country, which means that if you earn your money outside of Paraguay, let's say on the internet, you don't pay any tax. You only pay tax on income that you get inside of the country. Paraguay really only has one big city, and that's the capital. All other cities are far smaller and they're not as metropolitan at all. I mean, maybe if you go to the second biggest or third biggest cities, you're going to find something that's similar to a big city, but not really. It's a small country, it doesn't have many big cities, and if you go to the small cities, it's going to be pretty chill there, and you'll probably be able to find, raw milk, raw meat, and farmers. I haven't went there, so I don't know, but still, it seems as though it's that type of a country. And when it comes to the weather, half the country is tropical and the other half is subtropical. So you can choose. You want a tropical environment, go to one half of the country. You want a subtropical environment, go to the other half of the country. Paraguay has the lowest exposure risk in South America, which means that, there are no earthquakes, there are no issues in terms of, you dying in an accident that's caused by nature, not caused by human beings. And the location is great. You're in South America, and you're landlocked, and the countries around you aren't really that hostile. They're pretty friendly toward each other, and Paraguay isn't really hated by anyone in the world. You're far away from the US, you're far away from Russia, you're far away from China, from North Korea. Paraguay seems to be welcoming to foreigners. The residency and the path to citizenship doesn't seem to be very hard. Opening a bank account doesn't seem to be very hard. Depositing funds over there doesn't seem to be very hard. Establishing a life over there doesn't seem to be very hard. And again, when it comes to the popularity and the tourism, no one really thinks, oh, I want to go to Paraguay, so you're going to be left alone. The only problem I see with Paraguay is pollution. But that's only going to be in areas where agrotoxicity is a concern and the big cities, which is only one city. So if you choose a place in Paraguay that's less known, you're not going to be subject to the industrial processes that you would see in the capital. So all in all, great location, low exposure risk, great safety, great government, great, economical policies. You don't have to pay tax. Good path to citizenship, easy to get residency, pretty alright language too. I mean, it's Spanish. Great weather, not very well known. Close to Uruguay. Uruguay is also a good option, but it's more popular and it's more expensive. And by the way, Paraguay is also pretty cheap. So go to Paraguay is all I'm saying. It seems to be one of the best choices out there, especially if you're thinking about South America. The next country is Mexico, and for good reason. Many health conscious people go to Mexico. Ray Pete, when he was alive, may he rest in peace, lived in Mexico. He went there and he drank a bunch of orange juice over there, and Mexico is one of the biggest orange juice producers. Mexico has very great food access. There's a culture around dairy and meat, so you'll always find dairy and meat everywhere, raw if you want it. Of course, the meat will come raw, but the milk too. You can also find raw milk and raw butter, it seems. Temporary residency is pretty easy to get. Permanent residency is pretty easy to get if you live there. The path to citizenship isn't that hard. The government isn't too intrusive. The taxes are pretty good. Everything about Mexico is pretty good. The only two things are safety and pollution. And you solve these two by going to the right place. So my recommendation is to look at some statistics regarding crime rates in all the Mexican states. And you look at the bottom 5, and you go to Google Maps. And you look at the big cities, and maybe you land there. If you go and visit Mexico, maybe you land there. But then keep looking at Google Maps and try to find these smaller places. If you pick one of these smaller places, you'll most likely stumble upon great air quality, barely no crime whatsoever, great food access, great nature, very friendly people, and you'll be able to interact with them as long as you know Spanish. They're more likely to know English in the bigger cities, so if you go to these smaller places, it's better to know Spanish. Now, if you want to live in a big city in Mexico, the only city I'd recommend is Merida. Merida is one of the safest cities in North America, and it also has really good air quality. So go there. That's the best place to go if you want to live in a big city in Mexico. The only problem with Merida is it's very, very hot, according to what most people say. So if you have no problems being hot, then go to Merida. The next absolute gem of a country is El Salvador. The only bad thing about El Salvador is the weather. If you can't stand the heat, it's hot over there, okay? It's the 13th latitude, and you don't have the standard autumn, winter, spring, and summer. You have a dry season and a wet season. So for 6 months of the year, it rains a lot. For the other 6 months, it's just dry and hot. That's it. No summer, no winter. Nothing like that. Just sun all year round, but 6 months of the year, you have a bunch of rain. So weather-wise, it's very healthy. There's a lot of life over there, but it's pretty monotonous. And from a health perspective, I'll take it. I don't care. I love that. Because even if you go to Spain and Portugal, for some months of the year, you're not going to get any UV. It's better than Northern Europe, but still, you're going to have those depressing winter days. In El Salvador, you'll never have that. The sun also goes up and goes down at the same times all year round. Approximately. Like in Sweden, it varies a huge amount across the year, and so your circadian rhythm will be affected greatly. You won't be able to maintain the same sleep schedule. While in El Salvador, you'll feel like you're going to bed and waking up at the same times all year round, and you'll feel like your sleep schedule is really nice. As for food quality, it seems to be great. There are many health conscious people from the West who are going there and establishing businesses that help you access grass-fed meat. Raw milk seems to be no problem. There seems to be several raw milk sources in El Salvador. It seems to be like Costa Rica in terms of The farming practices, it seems to be pretty nice over there. You've got access to fruit, of course. It's a tropical place. You know, again, there's a lot of life there. And wherever you see that there's a lot of life, you'll have good food access. El Salvador is also one of the safest countries in the world. So, look, there's this amazing guy, that's the president, called Nayib Bukele. Nayib Bukele built a big-ass mega prison, and he put all the criminals in there. Okay? He took everyone who had tattoos that looked like criminal tattoos. He took everyone who was obviously a criminal, and he put them in this prison. And what happened is the crime rates went down. They went down by a lot, to the point where it's one of the safest countries in the world. It used to be one of the most dangerous countries in the world. The only problem with El Salvador is pollution coming from cars. So because of the country's past and because of the gangs, people didn't really walk around a lot. They took their cars. And so El Salvador really focused on building roads and making sure that everyone has a car and all that. So there's a lot of air pollution. If you walk around in San Salvador, you won't be smelling very good air. And that's why, in general, I don't recommend going to big cities. San Salvador is the biggest city in El Salvador. Don't go there. Go to some smaller place that doesn't have this problem. Again, the smaller the place, the less pollution you're going to have over there. So, as long as you pick a place that isn't San Salvador or some place where there are a lot of cars moving around and, gassing you, you won't have any problems. Now, there are two things you need to know about El Salvador that I'm going to say over here that are primarily my thoughts, really. One is a good thing. Two is a bad thing. The good thing is they've adopted Bitcoin. And if you don't know about Bitcoin, it's basically a decentralized currency that's very easy to move around. No one controls it. No government can take it away from you. You own it. And it's the hardest currency ever invented. And if you really research the topic, you'll notice that if there's anything you can invest in right now that will hold its value over time, it's going to be Bitcoin. And that's because of the properties of Bitcoin. I'm not saying this as someone who has emotions attached to Bitcoin. I don't really care about it. I don't really care about its name or the entire archetype that is the Bitcoiner. I don't care about all of that. I'm just looking at it from a pure what is it and what does it do standpoint. Number two, which is a bad thing, is it's all too good to be true. But it is true. Okay, the crime rates are low. They did adopt Bitcoin, so they really care about the economic freedom of their citizens. Again, it's not about Bitcoin, it's about the economic freedom of their citizens. It's about the thought. The government is great, the weather is great, the food access is great. Everything about the country is great right now, which means that a lot of people will move there. And over 10 years, it might get a bit crowded. So be careful, because El Salvador might become the next Mexico. It might become the next Costa Rica. It might become the next Portugal or Spain. These very, very popular places to go to and live in and move to. And that will, of course, drive the prices up. It will make it harder to live there. It will drive the rent up. And it will give you less peace and quiet. The next country isn't a country. It's actually a continent. And this continent is a candy shop of places to move to. It's South America. We've already looked at Paraguay. Of course, Paraguay seems great from a lot of angles, but Paraguay is not the only country that's great. You've got the south of Brazil as well. And Brazil, you might think that it's very dangerous, but the south of Brazil, pretty safe. Now there are floods, sure, but if you pick the right place, it's not going to be a problem. It's going to be a great place to be. And how often does a flood happen? And will it kill you? No. I would avoid Chile for two reasons. It's right next to two tectonic plates that are pushing against each other, which means a bunch of earthquakes. Okay, and that's what you see in Chile, a bunch of earthquakes. You don't see that in Europe, you see that in Chile and other places as well, like Japan, but that's because they're right next to tectonic plates. Any place that is right next to tectonic plates should ideally be avoided. That's my opinion, at least. The air quality in Chile seems to be very bad, unless you go to very specific places, it seems. According to Darko Velcek, the people in Venezuela and the country in general is very nice. Okay, the people are very friendly and the country is very beautiful. Food access seems to be great there. Housing seems to be great there. The life over there seems to be great if you pick the right place. So when the government stabilizes, you can go there. It will become a good option. According to him, that's his prediction. And I have no reason to not believe him, of course. Ecuador is very cheap. It's very sunny. The UV is very high, so you'll have to be wary of the sun. But in general, if you're smart and you're health conscious, you'll be able to take advantage of that rather than be scared of that. Okay? More UV is a good thing. You know, you've always got the shade, but you don't always have UV. Ecuador is actually an option that is discussed by many in conjunction with Mexico and Thailand and Philippines. Ecuador is pretty popular among expats. But remember, don't use the word expat, use the word migrant, because all expats are migrants, so they're not expats. Expats don't exist. There are only migrants. I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, many Westerners go there because it's cheaper, the weather is great, and it's very beautiful. I don't know a lot about Ecuador, but I know that many people have went there and they really like it. If you avoid the big cities and you go to some of the, smaller places in Ecuador, I think it's a great option. But again, I don't know a lot about it, so, if you're from Ecuador and you've visited many places in the country, chime in the comments. If you're from any of these countries, chime in the comments. I'd like to know more about them. This is just from what I've found on the internet, trying to, put the puzzle together from a health perspective. Next, we've got Argentina. Argentina is arguably one of my favorites in South America. If I were to go somewhere, it would probably be Paraguay or Argentina. And the reason why I like Argentina is because the president, first of all, seems to be a really nice guy. He seems to care about the people. The population density is super low. The resources are abundant. They have more cows than people. 8th largest country in the world. And lots of cows, lots of milk, lots of steak. The entire population eats steak. So if you want to find a partner that's healthy, they've grown up eating meat. So you won't have any, frail vegans over there. You won't have that problem in Argentina. The government is very nice to you. Residency is pretty easy to get. Citizenship is very easy to get. If you have a child in Argentina, doesn't matter, where you're from. If you have a child in Argentina, you get the citizenship. That's the way it is with Brazil, with Mexico, with Costa Rica, with Chile, with many of these South American and Central American countries. If you have a baby there, the baby gets the citizenship and you also get the citizenship, like in a few weeks. So if you want to do birth tourism, very good place to go to. It's also a great passport, not that bad. So Argentina is definitely a place to consider, and even if it gets popular, I mean, the 8th biggest country, and it only has 14 million people living there. I mean, please. It will never get crowded. That's my prediction, at least. Peru, that's where Darko Velchek lives. Also a good place. Problem is, there's a lot of poverty over there. You have to pick the right place. The big cities are polluted, of course. And you have to be careful with food because it does seem to be a little bit polluted over there. So you'll have to go to a place where, you'll have access to good farmers. But in general, what they say about Peru is that the food is the best in the world. So when it comes to food access, if you go to the right places, it seems to be very good. The weather is very good. Everything over there seems to be very good except the pollution and some of the crime and, again, some of the poverty that's over there. But you can say that about many South American countries, so I won't hold that against Peru, and I don't think you should. Uruguay is often called the Switzerland of South America, and that's because they've been outside of any political problems, internally and externally. No wars, no real problems with the population, no corruption from what I can understand. It's a very beautiful country. You've got everything you need there. It's pretty modern. It's a good tourist destination. Not many people actually consider it from a tourist perspective or from a moving there perspective, except if you're doing the actual research and you find out about these things about Uruguay. Then, of course, it becomes a great destination if you actually know the details about it. But you probably didn't know these things about Uruguay prior to me, telling you. So Uruguay is great. The only problem with Uruguay is people say that it's expensive. It's practically a perfect country, really. So of course the prices are going to be high. So if you want to save money, if you don't have a big budget, go to Ecuador. If you have a big budget and you're rich, of course you can go to Uruguay. No problems. You might have already known this, but if you're an EU citizen, you're allowed to live wherever you want in the EU, which means that if you already live in Europe, you might want to move to a country that is within Europe because it's more convenient. Now, the choices within Europe are not that great, but I would say that Bulgaria and Romania and Croatia are pretty good choices. Why? Because they're not very popular. If you look at Spain and Portugal and Italy and Greece, they're nice if you find a good, small town that isn't very popular and that still has access to the things you want to have access to. but they're too popular, again, and they're expensive. So, unless you want to be self-sufficient or you want some very small place in those countries, I would avoid them. When I say Romania and Bulgaria and Serbia, Montenegro and Croatia, you don't think, oh, that's a place I want to go to. But when I say Spain and Italy and Portugal and Greece, you say, those are places I want to go to. When in fact, I'd say that Eastern Europe is a much better option. It's cheaper, it's very nice, and people leave it alone. You know, tourists aren't going to these countries, the Eastern European countries, as much as they're going to Western European countries. The difference is huge. And people are moving to Spain and Portugal far more rapidly than they're moving to Eastern Europe. So Eastern Europe is a great option because not many people consider it, and it's actually great. You know, the pollution isn't that bad if you pick the right place. As long as if you go to any capital, that's going to be a problem. But if you find a good place in Bulgaria or Romania, the air quality is going to be good. It's only in the capitals and, you know, the heavily industrialized places that the pollution is going to be rampant. These countries are beautiful, they're on the cheaper side. Citizenship and residency doesn't seem to be super hard to get, especially if you're an EU citizen. I mean, you can just jump right down there and, you know, rent an apartment and that's it, you're living there now. And in fact, there are many people who are going to Bulgaria to be self-sufficient. When they want to farm and be self-sufficient, they're going to Bulgaria because it seems to be a very good choice if you want freedom. And an advantage of especially Romania and Bulgaria is the tax is very low. The tax is very low in those two countries, and in general, again, the government isn't very spying on you. So you've got more freedom over there and low taxes, and everything is working for you, really. The final option I'd like to discuss is not an option, but there are actually many options. They're a type of option. Islands. So you've got the Caribbean islands, you've got Madeira, you've got the Azores as well, you've got Cape Verde. You've got all these places that are pretty isolated in a big body of water. That's really what I'm talking about here. You've also got Puerto Rico, for example. Those kinds of places. The thing with islands is they're isolated, which means that you're isolated from the rest of the world, which is a good thing, but it also means that you might need to rely on the rest of the world. For example, sneakers aren't produced in any island that I can think of, so they're going to be imported. All islands have the problem of needing to import everything. So if you're going to move to an island, the most important thing is that the food on the island is produced locally, that they're not reliant on import to get food. Because if anything happens in the outside world, if anything happens with the imports, you're done. Okay? And if there's no food production on the island, how are you supposed to eat locally? You need local food to be healthy. Any healthy group of people in the history of mankind has eaten what is around them. No one has eaten anything that's far away from them. Okay? So all the food you eat should ideally be local. And if you can't do that on an island, you need to discard that island. In São Miguel, for example, the biggest island in the Azores, they have a bunch of cows. So food is not going to be a problem. But then again, you have to weigh in the number of cows in relation to the rest of the population and whether they're exporting or not, and so on and so forth. But if you know a farmer over there and you have access to milk and meat, that's it. And then, you know, it's an island, so you generally speaking have pretty good access to seafood, fresh seafood that's caught every day. With many islands, they're very expensive, but they're only expensive if the tourism is very high. So the Canary Islands literally represent modernity. Never go there, even on a vacation. It's very expensive if you were to live there because of the tourism, and there's a lot of tourism, so there's no reason to go there whatsoever. Same thing with Bermuda, same thing with many of these popular islands in general. If you go and find an island that isn't very popular, that not many tourists go to, that not many people think about, you know, moving there, but it's still a good place to go to, it's a good place to live, then you're going to find that the tourist issue, of course, is gone, the people moving there issue is gone, and the cost issue is gone. The last thing about islands is exposure risk. Okay, many of these islands are volcanoes, so you have to look at the history of the island and what it is exposed to. The thing with this video is it's based on principles. Everything you talk about is based on certain principles, and I want to go through the principles here so that you really understand them, so that when you leave, when you stop listening to this video, you know what it is that you're actually thinking about when you're choosing a country. You know that the information and the things that I presented in this video, okay, that's why this is a good thing. This is why I see the thing that he said as a good thing. Location. Location is the first principle of where you want to live in the world. Of course, where refers to location. The location determines whether there's life in the area you're in. It determines whether there's a war near you. It determines the type of people that are there, how many people are there, the exposure risk, whether you're close to a tectonic plate or not. So the location determines a lot. The next principle is the country size. The bigger a country is, the more freedom you have. Why? Because you have more locations to choose from. If you're in a country, it is easier to travel within that country as opposed to traveling between countries. The next principle is population density. So you've got the land, but how many people are there? The more people you have, the more problems you're going to have. Okay, the more of modernity you're going to have, the more pollution you're going to have, and the less freedom you're going to have, because people compete for resources. So the less people you have in a certain area, the more you can do with that area. Unless these people are necessary for you to have access to something. Okay, you need a certain amount of people to be able to use Amazon and Wi-Fi and whatever it might be. But generally you want to have as few people as possible, making sure that that can happen if that's something that you want to have access to. The next thing is popularity. Popularity will determine the density of the area, the population density over time. So you want to make sure that the place you're in is very good, but not many people know about it, because if people know about it, then it's popular, and if it's popular, people will move there. The next principle is a part of location, but it's the latitude, and the latitude really affects the UV. If you're at the 60th latitude, you're not going to have a lot of UV. So the latitude is very important, and the latitude determines your UV access and your access to life. Speaking of life, life is what determines food access. You've got sun, water, and magnetism. Those are the things that create life. If you go to El Salvador, you're going to have far more life over there than you're going to have in the Middle East. Why? Because there's more water there, there's more magnetism there. Not that I know a lot about magnetism, but I do know that it affects life. And you've got a lot of sun there as well. So the equation is satisfied. While in the Middle East, you've got a lack of two of the things. You've only got sun, so you've got far less life. The last principle is the government, which is really a reflection of the consciousness of the people. Now, what do I mean by consciousness? You go to Iceland, everyone is very nice. It's a very peaceful country. The government is also peaceful, okay? You go to Sudan, you're not going to find a lot of peace there. The people aren't peaceful, the government isn't peaceful at all. Again, they split up because of how not peaceful it is. There's a lot of conflict over there. Why is that? Because places that have been subject to a lot of suffering will cause more suffering. So places that have a long history of war will have a population that is more likely to cause suffering toward others. So you have to pick a place where the population is pretty peaceful because they haven't been subjected to a lot of suffering. The consciousness of the people within any area is ultimately what's going to determine the pollution, the safety, the government, and ultimately your health. Go and achieve excellent health. I know you can do it.